What's up, Coachable family? Welcome back to the Coachable podcast. I am your host, Tori Gordon, here in Blue Wire Studios, live in Las Vegas. And I'm joined today by none other than Light Watkins, who I'm so excited to have the honor to speak with. Light is somebody who is such a bright light in this world. He is a meditation teacher. He is the author of 3 best-selling books, The Inner Gym, Bliss More, Knowing Where to Look. And most recently, his new book, Travel Light, Spiritual Minimalism to Live a More Fulfilled Life. I know already, before we jump into this conversation, it's going to be filled with so much wisdom, insights, and practical tools that you can apply to your life to help you cultivate more inner peace and connect with your purpose so that you can live a more fulfilled life. So without further ado, let's jump into this episode and this awesome conversation. Light, welcome to the Coachable podcast, my friend. Thank you for tuning in and being here with us.
Thank you, Tori, and roll tide.
I love it. Roll tide. I found out right before we started filming that we are both Alabama natives. You grew up in Montgomery, Alabama. Isn't that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Grew up in Montgomery, child of the 70s. So that was a little bit before your time, I imagine.
Just a little bit. I was a 90s, early 90s baby. But yeah, tell me, because this is my first time really getting to sit with you and get to know you outside of what I know online. But give me just a little bit of your background. Like, how does an Alabama boy go to like becoming a meditation teacher that is teaching the Megan Markles and the like who's who of the world and traveling out of a backpack for 5 years? I mean, give me a little bit of the background.
So, quick montage of my background. Grew up in Montgomery, went away couldn't wait to get out of Alabama, to be perfectly honest. I'm sure you can relate.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with it necessarily. It's just a bit slow. If you want a little more excitement in your life, then you're going to have to go elsewhere. Grew up going to church every Sunday pretty much because that was the toll you had to pay to be able to go play on Sunday afternoons. My mom was a stickler for her kids needing to go to church. She wasn't a very religious person, but she felt like it was a good foundation, just to understand how to be a good person and stuff like that. So anyways, never really connected to religion. Nothing against it. I just didn't really feel like it was for me. I didn't know what was out there. I just had a lot of questions and not a lot of answers. So then after college, I started dabbling in the fashion industry. I started doing some modeling. I started taking some leaps of faith. Cut to me living in New York City, and I'm going out to dinner with the girl that I was dating at the time. She was getting ready, and I saw this book on her bookshelf called Conversations with God, and I picked it up and started reading it. And that became a sort of gateway book to me becoming a more intentional spiritual seeker. And I started realizing, well, I think I have more gifts and talents than I'm able to use in the modeling industry. So I started dabbling in yoga and meditation. I started prioritizing that over going to modeling castings. And then eventually I said, you know what? I need to go to the Mecca of spirituality in America, which happened to be Los Angeles at the time. This is now 2002. And so I decided to retire myself from modeling and to become a yoga teacher, which I did. I went out to LA, took a yoga teacher training, and met my meditation teacher, the man who would really transform my relationship with meditation. And I started meditating like clockwork. And in 2007, I went to India for the first time, and I studied with him in becoming a meditation teacher. And later that year, I became a full-time meditation teacher. So that was a little bit over 15 years ago now, which also kind of changed my life because I started doing talks on meditation themed topics. I have a popular TED talk that I gave back in 2015, and I started writing books. I wrote my first book, I think in 2014, came out in 2015, started doing retreats and trainings around the world, started giving keynote talks. And then in 2018, I had this inner calling to vacate my 2-bedroom apartment in Santa Monica and start traveling light.
Hmm.
In other words, I moved into a carry-on bag, got rid of everything else, no storage room. If it didn't fit into the carry-on bag, it had to go. So I ended up throwing away yearbooks, photo albums.
Sure.
Granted, I scanned everything in, so I still have all that stuff in
Hmm.
digital form, but I got rid of the hard copy version of them. And I've been traveling light ever since. And then through that experience, I developed a framework for what I call spiritual minimalism.
Mm.
And, normal minimalism is, I want to get rid of this chair, this couch, this table to create more space. And the thinking is if I can create more external spaciousness, then I'll experience more internal peace.
Mm.
And with spiritual minimalism, it's about creating spaciousness internally. And as a result of creating spaciousness internally, you may not live in what someone would consider to be the conventional minimalist environment, but you feel peaceful inside. And as a result, you're not attached to the things, um, mostly to things that are not serving you.
Right.
No one has to tell you not to be too attached to things that you enjoy already and that are beneficial and healthy for you, right? You
Hmm.
should be attached to drinking water. You should be attached to exercise. You should be attached to eating whole foods. But it's when we get into areas like sugar consumption or toxic relationships or outdated belief systems, meaning belief systems that are not lining up with our direct experience.
Mm.
But we can't seem to let go, and usually when we feel stuck in life, it's because of one of those kinds of things. It's not because you're drinking, it's not because you're hydrating, it's not because you're exercising,
Sure.
it's not because you're being of service. It's usually because there's a part of your life, probably a blind spot, where you're holding on to something that's no longer serving you, but
Mm.
you can't seem to let it go. And in
Hmm.
order to do that, clearing out your living room and getting rid of that old blender you haven't used in 2 years is not going to be the solution. You need to do it. You need to get rid of the internal clutter. You need to get rid of the emotional baggage. And then as a byproduct of that, you'll be able to let go of the things that are holding you back.
Whew. You, my friend, are speaking my language in so many ways. And I'll tell you why, because what you call internal clutter, I've called it emotional debris.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the kind of metaphor I use, and the listeners who frequent this show have probably heard me talk about, is um, that life will bring you storms. And storms typically kick up a lot of debris. And then what happens when we have been taught how to emotionally process and how to really navigate big, challenging times, which most of us weren't as children. But if we are, we're taught how to go clean that up, right? Part of my story is that I experienced a large tornado in Alabama. I don't know if you remember the April 2011, the massive F4 tornadoes that came through. It came
Mm-hmm.
through Tuscaloosa. And that I was living there at the time, going to college there, and it completely destroyed the town. And so I have this visceral memory, right, of all of this debris and all of this damage, and how often we experience those kind of storms in our own life, whether it's divorce, heartbreak, um, job loss, a disease, something that's happened, right? And it kind of just lays there. And then inevitably we, instead of picking up the pieces and sorting through what do we want to keep, what needs to be discarded, it just kind of all takes up space. And then inevitably something else challenging comes at some point, and more debris gets piled on top, and more debris gets piled on top. And I know that there are listeners who are listening to this right now, and they're like, "Light, Tori, I am up to here. I cannot see over the debris and the clutter in my mind, in my heart. I don't know which way is up. It's a mess. It's a mess in here. My mind is so filled with stories and beliefs and thoughts and lists of things I should be doing. And I don't know, I can barely breathe. How do I start to declutter? How do I start to untangle that web, that ball of yarn that's like feels like it has just grown and grown and grown for so long. And so that's where I would love to start with you. It's like when people are like up to here, because I imagine that you've
Yeah.
got students that come to whether it's your workshops, your retreats, or they come to meditation and they're like, we come to it because we're seeking something. We need help. We're realizing that we need a better way because what we're doing is not working. So what do you say to people who are like, oh, my mind is so filled with clutter? How do you start to piece out and understand what is mine? What do I want to keep? What do I want to discard? What's that process like?
Yeah, I like something you said, just a moment ago. You said what we're doing is not working, obviously. And I think that that's something that we may say in passing, but we don't really embody that, what Einstein said, you can't solve a problem. Einstein said you can't solve a problem from the same state of consciousness that created the problem. You can't, right? What you have to do is you have to rise above it. You have to expand your consciousness, which is just another way of saying you have to become more aware, right? You have to be aware of the blind spots. You have to be aware of the areas where you may be getting in your own way. So right off the bat, we want to humble ourselves to our whatever situation we're in and recognize that this situation has gotten a little bit out of hand, or maybe a lot out of hand. It's gotten more powerful than we're able to handle with the methods that we've been employing, and we need something new, something different. And so usually what's required is doing less. So a period in our day where we're doing less. And that's the essence of a practice like meditation. That's all it means when we talk about meditation is you're going to sit down and do less, do least, and then ultimately, when possible, do nothing. And what's quite remarkable about that, meaning it's worthy of remarking about once you have the experience directly, is that through just sitting and being, establishing yourself in being with your eyes closed, and you can sit comfortably. I talk about this in my work. You don't have to look like a monk because that's uncomfortable and you're not going to be able to get present with the experience. You're just going to be thinking, how long is this going to last? Oh my God, my mind is so busy, blah, 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 blah. So to solve for that, all you have to do is sit comfortably. Sit on your couch. Sit like you're going to watch your favorite Netflix show. And right off the bat, you have positioned your body and your mind to have a more settled experience. And then from there, you're going to start stripping back the layers of doing. So we naturally want to control something. And so the first area of control may be, let me try to not have these negative thoughts. Let me only have positive thoughts. Well, that's going to become an exercise in futility because whatever you're resisting in your mind is going to persist. And so if you try to suppress certain thoughts, you're going to end up having more of those thoughts. And it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how smart you are. See, we think there are some people out there who can control their thoughts, and then there's us.
Right.
And in my experience, I can't do it. So I can't meditate. Meditation is not for me.
Right.
But the reality is everybody's mind is busy. The nature of everybody's mind is more or less the same. And there was a study that was conducted back in, I think it was in the 80s at Harvard University. And it was conducted by a psychology professor who wanted to see if it's possible to control the mind. Can you suppress your thoughts that you don't want to have? And the way he tested this was he had a room full of students sit at tables, and they were instructed to put their index finger on top of, each of them had a silent little button mechanism. So they put their fingers on top of the button, and if you press the button, it sent a silent signal to some person who was able to see how many times each student were pressing the button. And he told them, I want you to just sit comfortably, close your eyes, and I want you to think about one thought only. I want you to think about white polar bears. And as you're thinking about the white polar bear thought, I want you to click the button and keep clicking the button. And if you accidentally start to get distracted and you start thinking about your lunch or your to-do list or whatever else has nothing to do with the white polar bear thought, then you'll stop pressing the button. But once you come back to the white polar bear thought, start tapping the button again so we can record how often you get distracted. Mm-hmm. And so they do this for 5 minutes. And at the end of that, they give them a little break, and then they have them come back, sit down, put your fingers back on the button. And they say, okay, now this time, you can think about anything in the world you want to think about, as long as it's not about a white polar bear. If you accidentally think about the white polar bear, tap the button so we can record how many times it accidentally occurs. So they record them for the same amount of time. 5 more minutes goes by. They tally up the results from the first half and the second half of the study. They do a meta-analysis. Guess what they find? When they weren't supposed to be thinking about white polar bears, when they were specifically instructed to let their minds roam free, think about whatever you want to think about, that's when they thought about white polar bears the most. And some of those students were bordering on obsession. That's all they could think about in that second 5 minutes was the thought they were instructed not to think about. And so the conclusion from this study, number one, any time you're trying to focus on a thought, your mind is going to get distracted after about 3 to 4 seconds. And number two, if you try to resist a thought, that's all you're going to think about. So this is the nature of the mind. Right. And when people talk about, oh, I have monkey mind, all they're describing is the nature of the mind when you try to control it. Right. You try to control it, you will create the conditions for a monkey mind type of feeling, which means your mind is just swinging all over the place like a monkey. Right. And so the solution is just to be comfortable. Don't try to control your mind. I talk about the minimalist approach to meditation because I know how it can be if you don't have good instructions or a good understanding of how it works. So I try to do that in a way that would help people just be able to do this really anywhere, on airplanes and living rooms, because it's so important for establishing that foundation for hearing the voice of your own intuition, which I call your heart voice. And so that's the second step. Once you get your stillness practice going, then you'll be able to tune into that voice that's going to help to lead you out of that experience you're describing, where you have all this sort of internal turmoil and chaos playing out, and you don't know which way is up and which way is down.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I love what you just said. It's like I just can hear the voice of so many people that says that's longing for inner peace, which is really what your book is about, helping people to cultivate. And it makes me think about, how do we really achieve inner peace when we're at war in our minds, right? And this brings up something that you just touched on, which is like the first step is stillness and actually just being with yourself, actually becoming aware of the voices in your mind and the thoughts that you're thinking and thinking about what you're thinking about, because most of us are so busy and so distracted and so tuned in and turned on with our devices and everything else. We live in a culture, especially in the West, that allows us to stay completely distracted if we'd like to. And yet the path to freedom and the path to peace requires us to actually reconcile and come into contact and closeness with all of the thoughts that we're actually trying to suppress. And so those that are like, okay, like I need to get still and I need to sit on my couch and I need to quiet myself and start to notice the voice. And hopefully in so doing, it kind of turns up the volume on that still small voice, which you just said is you call your heart voice. Can you talk about what that voice is? How do we start to differentiate all of the thoughts, all of the stories that keep running, the things that come in and come out all the time that take so much of our energy? And how do we start to differentiate that voice of the ego, maybe, from the voice of our hearts and our intuition that's really trying to show us and illuminate the path forward?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Um, well, to answer that question, I want to use an analogy um, to kind of illustrate how people actually benefit from a stillness practice in real life.
Hmm.
Okay, and the analogy is: imagine that you are in a dark, confined space, pitch black. Imagine if that space is roach infested
Mm.
and you're in there indefinitely. Okay. So you're standing some points because you don't want roaches crawling over you. And then eventually you get tired and you have to sit or you try to lie down and they're just all over you. And you never know where they're going to come from or how big they are. You can't even really see them. You can just feel them all over
Hmm.
you. You can imagine how anxious that situation would make someone
Yep.
where you're being attacked essentially by these things that are just kind of all over the place.
Hmm.
And this is sort of a way of illustrating how people are experiencing life,
Right.
right? And when you have a lot of darkness in your life and you feel like you're being attacked, and the things that are attacking you are not necessarily life threatening, they're just nuisances.
Hmm.
And but it distracts you from just doing normal things. So then you may hear a self-help guru or somebody say you should eat better or you should exercise, and you're like, I can't do that. I'm just trying to survive this little cockroach
Hmm.
situation. I'm trying to survive these little nuisances, and that could manifest as depression. It can manifest as OCD. It can manifest as some other kind of addictive behavior. But that's kind of just a way of illustrating it. And so what meditation does is it doesn't get rid of the cockroaches.
Mm.
What meditation does is it gets rid of the darkness. And all the
Mm.
darkness is the absence of light.
Mm.
So meditation turns up the light. It turns up the light.
Right.
And you can get a clearer view of whatever your situation is. Okay. And once the light gets turned up, you may see, oh, there's a hole where all the cockroaches are coming through.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a cockroach infestation and they're coming through this hole into this room. So you can patch up that hole. You can obstruct that hole. Now you've limited the number of cockroaches in your life.
Mm.
And so this is analogous to the process of healing and getting your life back on track. And you have to do the work.
Yeah.
But in order to do the work, you need to be able to see where the obstructions are or where the holes are or where the areas are that you're kind of getting in your own way.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about the heart voice or the intuitive voice or the still small voice, it's really just an awareness that's showing you what's obvious, the obvious connection. It's making connections between things that previous to that may seem to be unconnected or disconnected or chaotic
Mm-hmm.
in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So it's not an actual voice talking to you
Sure.
saying you should go out to do this thing. It's as obvious to you as seeing little cockroaches coming out of a hole
Yeah.
and they're coming all over you. And you're thinking, okay, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know I need to patch up that hole,
Sure.
right? So that's what the heart voice actually is. Now, when it comes to the ego voices and the other voices, the fear
Mm-hmm.
voices and all these other voices that are in there, those are the voices that create stories
Right.
to justify why these things are happening. So when we're jumping to conclusions, when we're making assumptions, when we're having misaligned expectations about what should be happening versus what's actually happening, those are those other voices of the ego and fear and trauma and pain and these kinds of things. And those are going to be in there too, but the still small voice is that awareness. It's
Mm-hmm.
the awareness that allows us to see the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
So I oftentimes equate meditation with Wonder Woman's lasso.
Mm-hmm.
You're a fan of Wonder Woman, I'm
Sure.
assuming. Do you remember the power, her special superpower of her lasso?
No, tell me about it.
It's a truth serum.
Mm.
When she lassos you and she asks you a question, you can't lie. You have to tell the truth.
Wow.
And meditation is like a truth serum in that
Mm-hmm.
way. It turns up the light and you start to see what's actually happening, and you're like, oh, this relationship in its current dynamic is not sustainable.
Right.
You know, I'm in a relationship with someone who's got a loose idea of boundaries. There's not a lot of clear communication. My expectations are here, and what's happening, what I'm experiencing directly is here. So that needs to be aligned.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not an overnight process, just like getting rid of these cockroaches is not an overnight process because they're having babies. And, maybe I'm laboring this analogy a little bit, but the point is you can see what you need to do.
Right.
And then you can get busy with more focused, targeted work.
Yeah.
So it may take you a couple months to get out of that abusive relationship. It may take you a year to get your side project going so you can get out of that toxic work environment that you've been in for 10 years that you hate going to, and you are so relieved when Friday comes, and these kinds of things that we basically normalized. But actually, when we look at it under the light of our inner consciousness and awareness, it's not sustainable. It's not creating the type of life that we say we want, and it's not prioritizing the kinds of experiences that we say light us up inside. And we have to do something about it, because either through getting more awareness or just through getting older, one thing becomes very apparent: nobody's coming to save you. You are your own superhero. So you got to put your own cape on. You got to put in your own work around here. No one cares as much as you care about your life and about how you feel about your life as you do. And so you have to take those steps, and they're scary steps to start taking, but it's also addicting. Once you get into the habit of betting on yourself, the habit of taking leaps of faith, then you'll find that you want to do it more and more in other aspects of life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just think about the places that some people are in, when it really, there has to come a time when you're willing to step out of the darkness and into the light and see your life and your situation, your circumstance for what it is. Because it's easy just to keep, to stay in ignorance. Ignorance is bliss. We say that for a reason, right? To some degree, but we're living with a level of suffering that we would rather, we're choosing over the discomfort of seeing maybe, to go on with your analogy, all the holes that are feeding our, our issues, our problems. Because sometimes we're like, I'd rather live in denial. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to go to the doctor and see what's actually happening. I don't want to become aware, because that means I actually have to be responsible for doing something differently, right? And so I really do feel like it's like people have to get sick and tired of being sick and tired, and be willing to take responsibility for their life and their results, before they can really make this a practice, because it's going to illuminate all of the things that you have gone for so long, like not knowing and just living in the fear of maybe embracing for what's going to happen. But turning on that light is so essential for actually creating the lives and the freedom and the fulfillment that we want. I want to talk to you about something very specific when it comes to traveling light, not just in a physical way through life, whether it be the minimalist approach like you, backpacking and kind of living out of a carry-on, but also spiritually, that minimalist perspective. And I want to talk about it through the lens of attachment. And what the role attachment plays, or lack thereof. How do we start to become less attached to the physical things in our lives, but also maybe some of the things that are really weighing us down, whether it be relationships or circumstances that we need to exit. What role does attachment play, and how do we begin the process of letting go of some of those things?
So attachment is a symptom of what I call the acquisitive approach to happiness.
Tell me more.
So again, going back to this analogy of being trapped in this confined space.
Yeah, it sounds like hell. My hell to me.
Yeah. The way a lot of people think you turn the light on is by achieving things in their life, right? So by achieving the next promotion, by getting the next iPhone, by getting the next soulmate, the next house, the next car. It's kind of like, you can light a match. So you have that much light in the room, which is some light, right? But then it eventually burns out. The match burns out.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about with turning up the light inside, that's a permanent solution. You turn that light up, it doesn't burn out, right? And so that type of internal light can only be done from the inside out. It can't be done through achievements solely. Now, I'm not anti-achievement. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
I'm out here achieving stuff. I hope to become a New York Times bestselling author. I hope to live in a really beautiful, comfortable space, have a nice, electronic car, all the things. Fly private if possible.
Yeah.
But if we identify those things as the source of our fulfillment, like I need to have that, or if I don't have those things, then I don't know who I am. Or if I had them and I lost them, now I want to go jump off a ledge somewhere because I don't know who I am, or I'm depressed. Or so if you're in that kind of situational depression circumstance because you've been so heavily identified with your things, then you have that sense of attachment that you're talking about. And the way to overcome that is to overcome your acquisitive approach to happiness. And the way you do that is you start to source happiness where it truly resides, which is internally. It's not external. Okay. So again, another sign is you have things from your past that are more sentimental than whatever's happening currently. And so what you're basically saying by holding on to the past is you're saying your best days are behind you.
Wow.
And a little mental reframe that we can do is just remind ourselves that actually what I'm creating now is my best. It's creating my best days in real time. This is the future in the making. And 5 years from now, I'm going to look back at today as the good old days in correlation to how present I can be with what's happening right now.
Right.
So then the work becomes, okay, how do I get present? And so all roads keep leading back to our internal work. And it's not just about sitting down and meditating. It's about being grateful for what we're experiencing in this moment, with the understanding that it's helping to guide and navigate us to or along our path. And I have a chapter in my book, Travel Light, called No Throwaway Moments, which is not something I created. It's something that already exists. But I use that in the framework of the spiritual minimalism lifestyle, because eventually, once you get the meditation practice going, and once you start to make your most important decisions from your heart and not from your head, then as an extension of that, you start treating life as though there are no throwaway moments. And then a quick little story just to illustrate my point here.
Yeah, please.
Is one day I was teaching yoga in West Hollywood, California, and my commute from my home to the yoga class was about 15 minutes. And I had driven this commute, hundreds of times. And this particular morning, I get in my car, I go to the road that takes me to the class, and there's bumper to bumper traffic, which never happened before. And I didn't understand why it was happening then, but I started getting frustrated. I gave myself enough time to get there according to how long it would normally take. And this time it looked like I was going to be really late. And I hated being late to my class because I'm teaching the class. I don't want to send the message that it's okay to be late, etc. So like any good Los Angeles driver, I zigzagged down to the next street that runs parallel to that street. And that street was also full of bumper to bumper traffic. So now, having exhausted the only other alternative route, I just surrender and I say, okay, I'm just going to be late. And I'm kind of breathing erratically, and I try to calm myself down because, again, I'm a yoga teacher, so I'm trying to use these tools in real life, and ended up showing up at the class about 10 minutes late. And I walk in and everyone's huddled in the back of the room, and I feel this crunching under my flip-flops, and I look up and there's this wall of mirrors in the front of the room. and I would have been sitting in the middle. And in the middle section of that wall of mirrors was a missing space. There was no mirror.
Mm.
And what they told me was that 10 minutes before, right at the top of the hour, the mirror in the middle dislodged and came crashing down into millions of shards of broken mirror. And it happened right where I would have been sitting had I gotten there on time. So as it turns out, that phantom traffic jam that I was cursing 15 minutes before was actually, it was saving me from having a very difficult start to my day.
Mm.
And that was, one of those rare times where you actually see the outcome of a delay
Right.
or a rejection. And it's that old adage, nature's rejection is nature's protection.
Mm.
And it reminded me that even in that situation, even in traffic, and granted, I left with plenty of time. I wasn't late. I wasn't doing anything, irresponsible. I left on time. I went and tried an alternative route, and still I was being rejected. I was being delayed. And in those situations, it's so easy to start to pull yourself out of the moment and get upset, get angry, start thinking this shouldn't be happening to
Mm-hmm.
me. This is an unnecessary obstacle, not realizing that life, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, is actually protecting you. You're being spared from something much worse.
Sure.
And if you can stay present in those situations, not only are you going to save your body a lot of wear and tear from having to go into that fight or flight reaction, but you may start to see other things that can be helpful for you down the line as a result of just having a lot more awareness. So that's essentially what no throwaway moments means. It means that there are no moments in your life that are not helping you in some way, whether you can see it or not see it,
Right.
including whatever you're experiencing right now.
Yeah, that's so powerful, and I love that story as a example of that redirection and how it is protection, and even the things that we label as wrong or bad really can be for us. That life is happening for us and not to us. And when it comes to attachment, I loved what you said about holding on to the things in our past is almost like thinking that our best days are behind us. And in letting go of the past, whether it's things that have happened, people from our past, etc., it's like that letting go only happens when you get present to create something new. Like when you're focused on creating something new, you just inadvertently redirect your focus instead of on the past of where you are. And in so doing that, you create something new. And I think we get so caught up on, well, how do I let go? It's almost like when you're sitting in meditation, you're like, how do I not think about the polar bear? How do I not think about the polar bear? You keep thinking about the polar bear, and it just is torturous. And what you're saying is just come into this moment. What is in front of you? Can you focus on what is in front of you instead of what's behind you? Because we think that's like we're missing something. Like we have this idea that we're missing out on something. And we want to bring it back into our reality, or we want to bring it back into this moment instead of and we miss the magic that's actually in front of us.
Yeah, and that's what I also talk about in the book, Give What You Want to Receive. That's the next chapter. Because you're right, it takes a sacrifice. If you want to create a certain experience, you have to give something up.
Yeah.
You can't be a writer. You can't be a writer who writes on a regular basis and binge watch every Netflix show that you hear about that's a good show.
Right.
Because you're not going to have time to do both. You can't get in the best shape of your life and eat whatever you want to eat.
Mm-hmm.
You have to choose,
Mm-hmm.
And somebody said, I heard somebody on a podcast recently say, I work really hard to get this six pack, and they start talking about diet. And he said, I had to give up a lot of pancakes, a lot of waffles. And he goes, but while I love that stuff, I love having a six pack more. So my six pack is really the story of all the pancakes I didn't eat.
Mm-hmm.
You can have whatever experience you want to have, but you can't have all of them.
Mm-hmm.
You can have whatever experience you want to have, but there's going to require sacrifice of some other experiences.
Yeah.
So I love that. I love that way of looking at, this idea of giving giving something up in order to receive something that is more in alignment with what you want to experience now, and it has to be something of value. You
Right.
can't just, how back in the day they would do like these food drives and people would go into their pantry and get rid of stuff they haven't even looked at or touched in years,
Mm-hmm.
some canned food or something like that. It's like it's easy to give up the canned food, whatever your version of canned
Right.
food is in your life, and call that a sacrifice. That's not a sacrifice.
Yep.
No, a sacrifice is you're going to get up earlier in the morning, even though you'd rather be sleeping,
Mm-hmm.
to work on your passion project. A sacrifice is you're going to hire a producer to help you with your podcast, because you don't know anything about podcast production,
Mm-hmm.
and you know that if you pay for someone to help you with your first 10 episodes, you're going to really show up for it, as opposed to doing what you may normally do, which is talk yourself out of following through after the first 2 episodes and seeing how hard it is, and then coming up with some important sounding excuses why you can't go to the third episode and that kind of thing. And
Right.
we've all done that with various things in our life. And when you really make yourself accountable and raise the stakes and put some skin in the game, that's oftentimes the missing component when it comes to really fully showing up to the things that you say you want to be doing more of.
Mm.
And that always requires some degree of sacrifice.
Yeah. And I think when we hear sacrifice, we just fixate and focus on what we are giving up, right? We think we're losing, right? Instead of all the things that we're gaining as a byproduct of
Yep.
releasing that. And it's just so funny how the mind, just that negativity bias, it just tends to think and focus on, the one thing, that one critic, that one hater on Instagram, or that one person that didn't like your post or that thing you wrote, versus the hundreds of people who've said thank you and have, appreciated your expression or what you shared. Right. And it takes that practice, that intentionality, to focus that attention. And this is something I've personally, one of the biggest benefits of meditation for me has been recognizing that I get to decide what I give my attention to and what I put my focus on. That the biggest power, my superpower is in, I'm going to create more of what I give my attention to, right? And what I focus on. And I know you talk a lot about time. I've actually heard you talk, because we think time is our greatest asset. Right? I just need more time to get more things done. But you have a different perspective on that. You're like, what is time if you're not present? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I would say that time is not time is a valuable asset. Don't get
Mm-hmm.
me wrong. Time is very valuable, but even more so than that, presence.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're not present with the time that you do have, then you're essentially squandering that time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just run the thought experiment, if let's say you have all the time in the day. Let's say you're a trillionaire. You're the highest, most valuable person in the world materially, and so you have all the free time in the world. But if you're fixated on something that's not happening, somebody doesn't like you the way you like them, or someone doesn't agree with you, if you're fixated on that and you can't be present, you can't be in the moment, then is that time you have really all that valuable?
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that even if you have just a little bit of time comparatively to other people who may have bought their time back, but you're more present during that time, because you're engaged in things that keep you in the moment more.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a daily meditation practice. Maybe that's a gratitude practice that you do. You've habituated yourself to dropping into gratitude in very normal situations where people would ordinarily be frustrated, such as being in traffic, being in line at the grocery store, being in the post office, the DMV, and stuff like that. And you find yourself present, not because you're thinking about being present, but because you're so engaged in the moment and you're noticing everything. And if you ever want to find out what presence looks like, look at a child. Just look at a child. The child is in the room, and they're absolutely fascinated and fixated on the littlest things. They're looking at screens, they're looking at people, they're looking at animals, This experiment that was conducted um, in 2007 by the Washington Post.
Mm-hmm.
So in Washington D.C., they have a subway system. It's called the Metro, and there's this busy hub where you get a lot of connecting train lines called L'Enfant Plaza. So
Mm-hmm.
there's thousands of people going through this place, going to work at the White House and Capitol Hill and these kind of places, government buildings, every morning during rush hour. So they had a musician down in the bottom in the bowels of this metro station playing his violin, and he had his little violin case set out in front of him, and he was playing the violin. It was pretty intricate pieces he was playing, and people were racing by. People were on their phone, speaking louder when they went by this guy because he was playing his violin, and they just wanted to see how many people were going to stop and put money in the bucket or stop and pay attention to a few bars of the song he was playing. And at the end of 45 minutes of him playing, he he had collected something like $35.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they said 7 people stopped. And out of the 7 people who stopped, 4 of them were children.
Huh.
And out of the 4 children who stopped, because they were going through there with their parents, probably going to school or going to the daycare or whatever, the parents yanked them along. So they didn't get a chance to stop for longer than a few seconds.
Right.
But what was interesting about this particular experience is that musician, 3 or 4 days before that, was performing solo in the Boston Symphony Orchestra for $1,000 a minute. His name is Joshua Bell. He's like one of the top 3 violinists in the world.
Wow.
The violin he was playing was a $3 million vintage violin, most expensive instrument in the world. And the pieces he was performing were some of the most intricately written musical compositions in history.
Wow.
And so he was doing all of this in the metro station in Washington, D.C. We've all seen people playing music if you've ever gone to any metro station in any major city. And they just wanted to see if at an unexpected place in an inconvenient time, if there was an expression of beauty, would people stop and notice it? And the conclusion is no. There's a 99.9% chance that you would not have stopped if you were going through that metro station and if you were going to work or whatever you were occupied doing. But if you were a child, there was about a 75% chance that you would have stopped and paid attention.
Right.
And so that childlike innocence is really what we're after when we talk about presence. And obviously, you can't do that all the time. But again, if you're in a situation where you're in that traffic jam, like I talked about, you have 2 choices. You can suffer because traffic isn't flowing like you want it to flow, or you can surrender. And surrendering is, like you said, accepting that this is happening for me and not to me. It's just navigating me. And it's through that surrender that you may be able to see something or have an insight about something that could connect the dots between 2 seemingly unrelated things. And that's what an epiphany or an insight essentially is.
Yeah.
Is when you're able to see something, and that could lead to something else that's, helping you to create more experiences that you ultimately want to have.
Man, that story about the violinist, it makes me emotional almost, because it is inspiring to me going forward. And I hope those listening to just be where you are, be here now, as Ram Dass says. It's just how much of our lives are we missing out on? How many amazing moments, how many connections, how much intimacy, that look in your child's eyes or in your partner, your partner's smile, or an incredible violinist that's right in front of you that you completely miss because we're consumed by our phones or by our to-do list or our minds, and so often we're not in relationship with reality. We're in relationship with our minds and the stories that are playing out all day, every day. And so I appreciate you sharing that, because it just makes me more mindful of what's in front of me, and that this moment is genuinely all that we have. And that our joy and our happiness and our peace isn't something in our future, and it's not something in our past. It's only experienced here, right now. And if we're not here, if we're not present for it, then we will miss the peace and the joy and the happiness that's available to us, the love and the connection. I always say when I go into a breathwork ceremony or some kind of ceremony that I'm leading is, the thing that you came looking for, the thing that you're after, it's here, right? It's not about finding it. It's already here. It's about removing what's in the way of you experiencing it. And sometimes that's just all of the distractions. And I loved also what you said about surrender. So I think about one of my great teachers who's been on the show, Marianne Williamson, who talks about surrender as giving up attachment to results. And that's hard. That's hard for us as human beings, because we think we know best. We think we know how it should be. We think we know that the traffic should be flowing and that person should have called us back or done us, treated us differently. Or for me, for so long, there were definitely periods of my life where I was like, it shouldn't be this way because I know best, right? And how much of our peace that will steal from us because we're attached to an end result, because we think that's the best case scenario. And I think what you're offering people is this perspective shift, or what A Course in Miracles calls a miracle shift in perception, which is, hey, actually, the thing you think is best, might be a very, just so far from what God, universe, life all really wants to give you. But if you're so attached to this thing, you're going to miss out on everything else. And are we willing to let go of how we think things should be? So important. And I want to ask you a personal question. It's a 2-part question around giving up attachment and letting go. What's been the hardest thing for you physically to give up or let go of, whether it's a physical possession of yours over time as you've been traveling the world, out of a backpack, if you will, and what's been maybe one of the hardest things spiritually or personally, mentally, maybe a belief system or something that you've had to let go of, that you found, because I think it's important for people to hear the reality of things, and the human part of it from your perspective, because it's easy to talk about these things, but what has been hard for you to let go of?
I think the thing that we all struggle with, and I'm no exception, is the FOPO, the fear of other people's opinions. And when you're running these kinds of experiments, like I'm going to live out of a backpack. I'm 45 years old and I'm going to live out of a backpack. I'm not going to have any stability in my life. Yeah. But I say I want to have a beautiful relationship. I want to start a family. So I know that on the surface, that's not going to be the most appealing lifestyle to potential candidates for, partnering with me in that way.
Sure.
And it's tempting to let that stop me from following through on this internal urge or nudge to take that leap of faith. But while that's playing out, that fear is playing out, because I'm not absent of fear. I still have fears. I have fears that, I'm going to run out of money. I have fears that people are going to stop wanting to publish books of mine. I have fears that people will stop wanting to take my meditation trainings and stuff like that.
Sure.
And it's not, the show's going to be over at some point. And yet at the same time, I have trust. I have trust that if I follow my heart relentlessly and I follow my curiosity shamelessly, that the net is going to continue appearing as it has been doing for my whole adult life. And so that's what I try to do as often as possible to sort of mitigate those fears is I look back through my past. I do I'll call it a past life analysis, not about past lives like
Mm-hmm.
reincarnation, but just the past, my past in my life.
Yeah.
And I've had lots of rejection like most people. I've had some beautiful moments of serendipity. I've had lots of really big successes. And when you look back, what you'll find is that every single one of those rejections led to something positive at some point, led to something positive, right? So if you had any blessings in your life, which I think most reasonable people could identify at least one blessing,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's being alive and being healthy and being able to see and talk and walk and
Mm-hmm.
hear and those kinds of things. We don't consider those blessings because we feel like they're common. Everybody has that, but there are a lot of people who don't have that. There are a lot of people who don't have that, and they would gladly give up all of their worldly possessions just to have the ability to see or to hear or to walk or to taste or to reproduce or to have something that we take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing this outdoor workout the other day where I was climbing all these bars and I posted this on my socials, a little bit to show off, but also a little bit just to inspire people to get outside more. And I said that it's not lost upon me how many things had to go my way in order for me to be able to do this
Mm-hmm.
at this stage in my life. I've never had a broken bone. I've never had surgery. I've never had to stay in the hospital or anything like that. And I had supportive parents, and I had a very good childhood growing up in Montgomery. I wasn't involved in gangs or I didn't get into fights. There was nothing like that. My family didn't control what I did in my life professionally once I left home. And that's there's value to all of those experiences. And so I consider all those to be blessings.
Yeah.
And so everything that came from that, I also consider to be a blessing, even if it was an experience that was difficult to navigate.
Yeah.
So, and that's how life is. If you want to be more patient, life is going to give you a situation for you to exercise patience. Just like if you want to have bigger quads, you got to get on that squat rack.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not fun.
Yeah.
It's like what Ronnie Coleman said, everybody wants to be big, but nobody wants to lift these heavy ass weights.
The
But that's how you
sacrifice.
get more resilient. You have to meet resistance
Yep.
in order to grow into your potential. And so that same is true for the things that we want to experience emotionally and spiritually.
Yeah.
You're going to go through a bad breakup if you're trying to become more forgiving as a person or more generous. You're going to deal with selfishness if you want to be more generous. And once you start to see that for what it is, and I attribute my spiritual teachers and practices for helping me to be able to see that for what it is and to meet it head on with a positive mindset, then you really don't have that many bad days.
It's so true. It's so true because you can see it as an opportunity. It's you can see it as an answered prayer. If you choose to, and I think that's really, really powerful. I'm curious, who did you write this book for specifically? Travel Light. Like who's that person that you had in mind when you were writing these pages on your? I've heard it on your phone or wherever you were, like in the world, like writing down, these thoughts and ideas that you wanted to get to somebody. Like who was that person that you had in mind, and ultimately, what do you hope that they take away from reading this book? Uh-oh. Okay. Yeah, we're recording. Okay. Okay, great. Um, yeah, so I'm really curious, like who did you write this book for? When you started writing these, thoughts, these ideas down on your phone wherever you were traveling, who was that person that you had in mind that you were speaking to, and what do you hope that they take away from reading this book most of all?
Well, first of all, I wanted this this book to be as timeless as possible.
Mm.
So I wrote it for someone, let's just say 200 years from now,
Yeah.
who who's wanting to um, find ways to get unstuck
Mm.
in their life, and they want something that feels accessible, that feels like there's real world application to it.
Mm.
It's not too theoretical. And these are people who don't necessarily want to sit down and read a long, War and Peace length
Mm.
book.
Mhm.
They want to just flip it open to whatever catches their eye. So the way I wrote it was in short stories, vignettes, little anecdotes, little exercises, and it's not meant to be read from cover to cover. Um, it's meant to be just kind of open, just like how we normally experience books. You pick up a book in the bookstore, the first thing you do, you just kind of flip it open.
Mhm.
You just kind of, see what catches your eye. And then maybe there's like a beautiful illustration that catches
Mm.
your eye. You're like, oh, this is interesting. What is this? And you go back a page or two to the beginning of that section and you may read a few lines of it. And what do we like the most? We like stories.
Yeah.
We like stories. We don't necessarily like long, drawn out, intricate, detailed stories where there's a lot of dialogue and you have to understand the context. You need to have just a quick little, set the scene part of the story, and then some identifying characteristics that you can relate to, and then that'll just draw you in. And so I tried to put as much of that in the book as possible,
Mm.
just to help people, especially people who've been out there struggling
Yeah.
a lot. It's interesting because in my trainings, I teach a lot of young people meditation. And what's ironic is that the young people, they they will be able to master the technique 100 times faster
Mm.
than older folks. And when I say older folks, I mean just people who are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s
Mm.
versus people who are 15, 16, that kind of thing.
Wow.
And what I've realized is the reason why younger people get it a lot quicker is that the older folks, we come into the room with all these assumptions about what we can and can't do.
Mm.
Because life does a really good job of beating the curiosity out of us and beating the optimism and the hope out of us that we had when we were younger. And we were just open to, okay, I'll try this.
Mm.
Okay, maybe I'll be good at it. Maybe I won't. I don't know. But at least I'm going to try it. I'm not going to prejudge myself and disqualify myself before I even try it.
Right.
But by the time you get 35, 40 years old, we already, I'm not that good at this. Oh, I have a monkey mind. Oh, I'm
Mhm.
not, I'm never going to pick this up.
It's not
Oh,
for
it's going to
me.
be so difficult. It's not for me. Yeah, exactly. And we do that as a defensive mechanism. We don't want to look stupid, so we
Mhm.
try to make ourselves, we self-deprecate beforehand. Um, and you could also maybe link it to the fear of other people's opinions,
Sure.
right? But while the kids get it faster, the kids haven't had enough life experience to appreciate the
Mhm.
benefits of it. So it's like they do it and they could take it or leave it. But whereas the adults, once they have the full experience of what meditation could feel like, it's just like this beautiful, it's like having a bubble bath in your mind.
Mhm.
This like vacation that you can take for 15 or 20 minutes in a more or less stressful day, and they appreciate it way more, a
Mhm.
hundred times more than the young people do. So it's
Sure.
an interesting little dichotomy. But the reason I was sharing that is, when it comes to this book and the way it's structured, um, it's structured in a way that adults consume, because adults who don't have a whole lot of time can consume it. And it's also made for us to be able to practice things very easily wherever we are. You don't need an altar. You don't need to go out and buy a meditation cushion or anything like that.
Mhm.
You can do these things wherever you are, even on the go.
Yeah.
And because it's important to be able to do that and get benefit from something quickly, so we can see, okay, this is something I can actually do. This is something I can benefit from.
Right.
Let me go back and dip in a little bit more as often as possible.
Yeah. Well, that's what I love about meditation and things like breath work is they're free. Once you learn the technique and you can take it anywhere with you. It's not something you have to sign up for a class or, be part of a gym or, you know what I mean, to practice. It's something that you get to, it's a gift you get to give yourself whenever you need it. And it's truly medicine. And so I just want to say thank you. Thank you for shedding light on the darkness on how we can illuminate our own darkness and be freed from it. And also how we can just enjoy life. I think, we all want the same things. We all want peace. We all want happiness. And these things can feel so elusive, so far away, so hard to attain. And so often we create unnecessary suffering for ourselves. And so part of the letting go process for me has been letting go of the need to participate in my own suffering anymore. And so I hope that's what people take away from this conversation and from your book. Will you tell people kind of how they can connect with you more, how they can get their hands on a copy if they want to? We'd love to know how they can connect with you a little bit further.
Yeah, so the central hub to find out about everything I'm up to is lightwatkins.com. That's my website. And the book is sold everywhere. You can buy a book, so in stores, online. And I'm on the socials at Light Watkins, Light Watkins.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, we'll make sure, like we do every episode, to put all of that in the show notes so that you guys can find Light on his side of the internet, connect with him, and learn from him and his practices. I encourage you to go get a copy of Traveling Light. I am confident that it will help you continue to walk the path, to explore the parts of you that you haven't connected with yet, and just find deeper fulfillment and purpose in your life, which we could all use more of. So, Light, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking your time and your wisdom and sharing your medicine with us, my friend. And you guys, I hope that this week that you will go apply what you learned. You won't just listen. You don't just let it come in one ear and out the other, but you'll use it, because that's when knowledge really becomes wisdom, when you have that experience for yourself. And that's when we all become a little bit lighter. So I hope you'll use it this week. Thanks for tuning in. Until next week, go be coachable. I love you. See you next week on the Coachable Podcast.